Miss Marple's Shattered Vase, The Pieces Cut. Deeper Than Glass, Chapter 1. The vase that held secrets the late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. The air was thick with the scent of lavender from the garden and the faint mustiness of old books. Miss Marple, her silver hair neatly pinned and her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, sat in her favourite armchair by the window, but her sharp blue eyes were not on her knitting. They were fixed on the object she had placed on the small mahogany table before her, an antique vase, its surface a swirl of deep indigo and emerald green, etched with peculiar symbols that seemed to dance in the fading light. She had found it that morning while sorting through the attic, a task prompted by a sudden urge to tidy the relics of her long life. The vase had been tucked in a dusty corner, wrapped in a faded shawl, as if someone had meant to hide it. Its weight surprised her, heavier than it looked, and when she brushed away the grime, the symbols caught her eye. Spirals, half-moons, and something like a jagged lightning bolt. They were not merely decorative. They felt deliberate, almost urgent, as if they were trying to speak. Miss Marple tilted her head, her lips pursing thoughtfully. "Now, what are you hiding?" she murmured, her voice soft but laced with curiosity. She reached for her spectacles, perched on the table and leaned closer. The vase was old, perhaps centuries so, and its craftsmanship suggested it was no ordinary heirloom. She traced a finger along one of the symbols, half expecting it to reveal its secrets under her touch. Instead, something shifted inside. A faint rustle, like dry leaves, made her pause. She turned the vase upside down, and a small folded piece of parchment slipped out, landing on the table with a whisper. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of a puzzle presenting itself. She unfolded the note carefully, its edges brittle with age. The ink was faded, but the words were legible, written in a hurried, elegant hand. "The glass holds the truth, but the truth cuts deep. Beware the one who seeks it." She read it twice, her brow furrowing. The cryptic warning was intriguing, but it was the signature that made her breath catch. E.L. Danvers. The name stirred a memory, faint and elusive, of village gossip from decades past. The Danvers family had once lived in the grand manor on the edge of St. Mary Mead, but they had left under a cloud of scandal. Something about a disappearance, or perhaps a betrayal. Miss Marple's memory, sharp as ever, promised to unearth the details in time. She set the note down and studied the vase again, her mind already weaving connections. The symbols, the note, the name. They were pieces of a story, and Miss Marple had always been adept at assembling stories from fragments. She rose, her movements spry despite her years, and carried the vase to the sitting room, placing it on the mantelpiece where it caught the light. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something unsettling about it, as if it watched her as much as she watched it. The clock on the wall chimed 5, reminding her of the tea party she was hosting that evening. A small gathering. Mrs. Price, from the vicarage, young Dr. Haydock, and the new schoolteacher, Miss Clara Wren. But St. Mary Mead had a way of turning even small gatherings into crucibles of revelation. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Perhaps the vase would spark conversation, or perhaps it would draw out something more. A slip of the tongue, a flicker of recognition. As she prepared the tea tray, arranging scones and her best china, a breeze slipped through the open window, stirring the curtains. The vase gleamed on the mantel, its symbols seeming to pulse for a moment in the shifting light. Miss Marple glanced at it, her knitting needle still in her lap. "You've been silent for a long time," she said softly, as if addressing an old friend. "But I suspect you have a great deal to say." Outside, the village of St. Mary Mead drowsed in the golden haze of late summer, its cottages and hedgerows as tranquil as a painting. But Miss Marple knew better. Beneath the surface of every quiet village lay currents of secrets, and the vase, with its cryptic note and hidden history, was about to stir those currents into a storm. Chapter 2. A crack in the silence. The sitting room of Miss Marple's cottage was aglow with the warmth of the evening, the soft flicker of candles mingling with the golden light of a late summer sunset. The tea-tray, laden with scones, clotted cream, and a steaming pot of Earl Grey, sat at the centre of the gathering. Mrs. Price, her cheeks flushed from the warmth and her usual penchant for gossip, was recounting the latest village rumour about the butcher's apprentice. Dr. Haydock, his youthful energy barely contained, leaned forward with a bemused smile, while Miss Clara Wren, the new schoolteacher, listened politely, her dark eyes darting occasionally to the mantelpiece where the antique vase stood. Miss Marple, seated in her armchair, observed her guests with the quiet attentiveness of a gardener watching for the first signs of a bloom. The vase, with its swirling indigo and emerald hues, had already drawn curious glances. Its etched symbols, spirals, half-moons, and that jagged lightning bolt seemed to catch the candlelight in a way that made them almost shimmer. She had placed it there deliberately, wondering if it might stir a reaction, a memory, or perhaps a mistake. "It's a remarkable piece, Miss Marple," Miss Wren said, her voice soft but carrying a hint of curiosity. She set down her teacup and tilted her head, studying the vase. "Wherever did you find it?" "In the attic of all places," Miss Marple replied, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Wrapped in an old shawl, as if someone didn't want it seen. I suspect it's been there for decades." Mrs. Price leaned forward, her lace collar quivering with excitement. "Oh, it must be one of those Danvers relics from the old manor. They had all sorts of odd things before they left, scandal and all." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I heard they were mixed up in something dreadful." Dr. Haydock chuckled, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Come now, Mrs. Price, every old family has a scandal or two. Probably just a dusty heirloom." But his gaze lingered on the vase, and Miss Marple noted a flicker of unease in his expression. Quickly masked, the conversation drifted to village matters, but Miss Marple's attention remained on her guests. She was about to steer the topic back to the vase when Miss Wren rose to admire it more closely. "These symbols are so unusual," she murmured, reaching out as if to touch it. Her hand hesitated, then brushed the vase's rim. What happened next was so swift it seemed almost fated. Miss Wren's sleeve caught on the edge of the mantle, and the vase teetered. Dr. Haydock lunged to catch it, but he was too late. With a heart-stopping crash, the vase struck the hearth and shattered, its fragments scattering across the floor like a constellation of broken stars. "Boo!" Miss Wren gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "I'm so sorry, Miss Marple. I didn't mean—" "No harm done, my dear," Miss Marple said calmly, though her heart was racing. Not from the loss, but from the opportunity. She rose, her movements deliberate, and knelt to inspect the wreckage. The shards glinted in the candlelight, their edges sharp and accusing, and there, among them, was something that did not belong. A small tarnished locket, its chain tangled in the debris. Mrs. Price let out a theatrical squeak. "Good heavens, what's that?" Miss Marple picked up the locket carefully. Her fingers steady despite the weight of her guest's stares. It was heart-shaped, engraved with a faint floral pattern, and when she pried it open, a faded photograph stared back. A young woman, her face solemn, her eyes wide with an emotion that could have been fear or defiance. The photograph was yellowed, but the woman's features were clear. High cheekbones, a sharp jaw, and a gaze that seemed to pierce through time. "Who is she?" Dr. Haydock asked, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. "I haven't the faintest idea," Miss Marple said, though her mind was already turning over possibilities. She glanced at her guests, noting their reactions. Mrs. Price's eyes were wide with curiosity. Miss Wren's face was pale, her hands clasped tightly, and Dr. Haydock was staring at the locket as if it were a ghost. The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Miss Marple closed the locket with a soft click and slipped it into her pocket. "Well," she said brightly, "accidents do happen. Shall we have another cup of tea?" But the atmosphere had shifted, the cosy warmth replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. As her guests made their excuses and departed, Miss Marple stood by the hearth, the shattered remnants of the vase at her feet. She thought of the note she had found inside it. "The glass holds the truth, but the truth cuts deep," and felt a prickle of certainty. The vase had broken, but its secrets were only beginning to spill. Chapter 3. The Shadow of the Past. The morning after the tea party dawned grey and heavy, with clouds hanging low over St. Mary Mead like a shroud. Miss Jane Marple sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside her, the locket from the shattered vase resting on a folded handkerchief. Its tarnished surface gleamed faintly in the dim light, the photograph of the unknown woman tucked safely inside. Miss Marple's fingers, nimble from years of knitting, traced the locket's floral engravings as her mind worked through the puzzle before her. The vase, the note, the locket, they were threads in a tapestry, and she was determined to unravel it. She had risen early, her sleep disturbed by thoughts of the Danvers family and the cryptic warning in the note, "The glass holds the truth, but the truth cuts deep." The name E.L. Danvers had lodged in her memory, connected to whispers of a scandal that had shaken the village decades ago. To piece it together, she needed more than village gossip. She needed facts, and in St. Mary Mead, facts about the past were best found with Mr. Percival Hodge, the local historian and retired schoolmaster who kept meticulous records of the village's history. Miss Marple tucked the locket into her pocket, donned her tweed coat, and set out for Mr. Hodge's cottage on the far side of the village. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and fading roses. As she walked, her eyes scanned the familiar lanes. The butcher's shop, the post office, the church spire piercing the mist. St. Mary Mead was quiet, but Miss Marple knew that silence often hid the loudest secrets. Mr. Hodge's cottage was a cluttered haven of books and papers, its walls lined with shelves that sagged under the weight of history. He greeted her with a nervous smile, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "Miss Marple, what a surprise! To what do I owe the pleasure?" His voice was warm, but his hands fidgeted, betraying a hint of unease. "I've come across something curious," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair as he poured tea. "An old vase found in my attic. I believe it may have belonged to the Danvers family. I thought you might know something about it." The change in Mr. Hodge was subtle, but unmistakable. His smile faltered, and his fingers tightened around the teapot. "The Danvers family," he said, his voice a shade too high. "Oh, they've been gone for years. Not much to tell, really. A sad business, that." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze steady. "Sad how, Mr. Hodge? I recall there was talk of a scandal, but the details escape me. Something about a disappearance, perhaps?" He shifted in his seat, pushing his spectacles up. "Well, yes, there was something. Eleanor Danvers, E.L. Danvers, as she signed herself, was the last of the family to live at the manor. She vanished one winter. Oh, must be 40 years ago now. Some said she ran off with a lover, others that she met with misfortune. The manor was sold, and the family name faded. That's all I know." His words were practised, but Miss Marple caught the hesitation, the way his eyes darted to the window, as if expecting someone to listen. She leaned forward slightly. "And the vase? It's quite distinctive, indigo and green, with odd symbols, spirals, half-moons, a lightning bolt. Does that ring a bell?" Mr. Hodge's face paled, and for a moment he seemed at a loss. "Symbols, you say? I don't recall anything like that. The Danvers had many antiques, but I never saw such. A vase?" He stood abruptly, knocking a book from the table. "I'm sorry, Miss Marple, but I've a meeting at the church. Perhaps another time." Miss Marple rose, her expression serene but her mind alight. "Of course, Mr. Hodge, you've been most helpful." She paused at the door, turning back. "One last thing. Did Eleanor Danvers have any close friends in the village? Someone who might remember her?" He hesitated, then muttered, "There was old Mrs. Lestrange out by the woods. She knew Eleanor, but she keeps to herself now. Not much for visitors." His tone suggested he hoped Miss Marple would leave it at that. As she stepped back into the misty lane, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. Mr. Hodge's nervousness, his vague answers, his quick dismissal, they spoke of fear, or perhaps guilt. The vase was no mere heirloom. It was a key to something the village had buried, and Eleanor Danvers, whose name was signed on that cryptic note, was at the heart of it. She glanced toward the woods, where Mrs. Lestrange's isolated cottage lay. The path would be muddy, and the old woman was known for her prickly nature, but Miss Marple was undeterred. The shadow of the past was growing longer, and she intended to step into its depths. As she walked, the locket in her pocket seemed to grow heavier, its unseen photograph whispering of a truth that cut deeper than glass. Chapter 4. Whispers on the Wind. The evening wrapped St. Mary Mead in a restless quiet, the kind that made the creak of a gate or the rustle of leaves feel like an intrusion. Miss Jane Marple sat by her sitting-room window, the locket from the shattered vase resting on the table beside her knitting. The shards of the vase itself were carefully gathered in a wooden box, their jagged edges catching the lamplight. She had spent the day mulling over Mr. Hodge's evasiveness and the name Eleanor Danvers, but her thoughts were interrupted by a sound, a faint crunch of gravel outside, deliberate and slow. Miss Marple's needles paused. She tilted her head, listening. The sound came again, closer now, near the garden gate. Not a fox or a stray cat. Too heavy, too cautious. She rose, her movements silent, and peered through the lace curtains. The garden was a maze of shadows, the rose bushes swaying in the breeze. But there, by the hedge, was a flicker of movement. A figure, cloaked in darkness, pausing as if to watch the cottage. Her heart beat steadily. Miss Marple was not easily frightened. She waited, her eyes narrowing as the figure lingered, then retreated into the lane, their footsteps fading into the night. She made a mental note of the height, tall perhaps, and the gait, which seemed purposeful rather than hurried. Someone was curious about her, or about the vase, and they were bold enough to come close. The next morning she examined the garden, her sharp eyes scanning for clues. The gravel path showed faint scuff marks, and a single rose stem was snapped near the gate, as if someone had brushed past in haste. But it was inside the cottage that she found something more troubling. She had left the box of vase shards on, the mantle, each piece accounted for. Now one was missing, a small curved fragment with a single spiral symbol, gone as if it had never been. Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Bold indeed," she murmured, her mind already tracing possibilities. The theft suggested not only knowledge of the vase's significance, but desperation to possess even a piece of it. She resolved to be more cautious, locking the box in a drawer and keeping the locket on her person. But the incident only sharpened her determination to uncover the truth. That afternoon she attended the weekly knitting circle at the vicarage, a perfect setting to gauge the village's mood. The women chatted over their needles, their voices, a hum of gossip and trivialities, but Miss Marple listened for undercurrents. When she casually mentioned the vase's shattering, Mrs. Price's eyes lit up. "Oh, Miss Marple, you don't think it's cursed, do you?" she said, half serious. "Old things like that, tied to the Danvers, well, they carry bad luck. My aunt always said the manor was haunted after Eleanor vanished." The other women murmured, some nodding, others scoffing. But Miss Marple noted Miss Clara Wren's silence. The schoolteacher's hands stilled on her knitting, her face pale. "A curse is just superstition," Miss Wren said at last, her voice tight. "But old objects can stir memories best left alone." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Quite right, my dear. Though I find memories, even painful ones, often point to the truth." As the circle dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze drifting to the churchyard across the lane. The ancient yew trees cast long shadows, and there, near the gate, she saw it again. A figure, tall and cloaked, watching from a distance. This time, the figure didn't retreat. Instead, they turned and slipped into the churchyard, vanishing among the gravestones. Her curiosity piqued, Miss Marple crossed the lane, her steps brisk but cautious. The churchyard was silent, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. She moved among the graves, her eyes scanning for movement. Near the far wall, beneath a crumbling angel statue, she found a clue. A cigarette butt still warm, its brand unfamiliar. She tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind noting that few in St. Mary Mead smoked such a distinctive type. As she returned to her cottage, the wind picked up, carrying a low, mournful sound, like a whisper or a warning. Miss Marple paused, her hand on the gate. The vase's secrets were drawing someone out of the shadows, someone who knew more than they should, and she suspected that the missing shard, the locket and the figure in the dark were all pieces of the same puzzle. One that was growing more dangerous by the day. Chapter 5. The Locket's Keeper. The woods on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead were a tangle of ancient oaks and brambles, their shadows deepening as the afternoon waned. Miss Jane Marple navigated the narrow path with care, her sturdy shoes crunching on fallen leaves. The locket, safely tucked in her coat pocket, felt heavier with each step, its photograph of the unknown woman a silent guide to her destination, the cottage of Mrs. Lestrange, the reclusive widow who had once known Eleanor. Danvers Miss Marple had learned of Mrs. Lestrange from Mr. Hodges' reluctant mention, and village whispers painted her as a figure of mystery. Once a vibrant friend of the Danvers family, now a solitary woman who rarely ventured into St. Mary Mead. Her cottage, half hidden by ivy and thorns, was said to be as unwelcoming as its occupant. But Miss Marple was not deterred by rumours or brambles. The locket, the vase, and the cryptic note all pointed to a truth buried in the past, and Mrs. Lestrange might hold the key. The cottage appeared as if conjured from the forest itself, its stone walls weathered, and its windows dark. Miss Marple knocked firmly, her knuckles rapping against the warped door. Silence followed, then a faint shuffle from within. The door creaked open, revealing a woman whose age was etched in the lines of her face, but whose eyes burned with a fierce, guarded intensity. Mrs. Lestrange's grey hair was pulled back severely, and her shawl hung loosely over a frame that seemed both frail and unyielding. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low and sharp, like a blade hidden in velvet. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Lestrange," Miss Marple said, her tone warm but steady. "I'm Jane Marple, from the village. I've come about an old matter, something to do with Eleanor Danvers and a vase I found in my attic." The name Eleanor Danvers had an immediate effect. Mrs. Lestrange's hand tightened on the doorframe, and her eyes narrowed. Eleanor's been gone 40 years. Why dig up old ghosts now? Miss Marple reached into her pocket and produced the locket, holding it up so the fading light caught its tarnished surface. "Because this was found among the pieces of that vase, and I believe it belonged to her, or someone close to her. I thought you might know who this woman is." Mrs. Lestrange stared at the locket, her breath catching. For a moment Miss Marple thought she might slam the door, but instead the older woman stepped back, gesturing brusquely. "Come in then, but don't expect me to like it." The cottage's interior was dim, cluttered with faded photographs and chipped porcelain. A fire smouldered in the hearth, casting flickering shadows. Mrs. Lestrange took the locket with trembling fingers, opening it to reveal the photograph. Her expression softened, then hardened again, as if warring with memories. "This is Eleanor," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Younger than I ever knew her, but it's her. Where did you say you found this?" "Inside a vase, hidden among its shards," Miss Marple replied, watching her closely. There was a note, too, signed by E.L. Danvers. It spoke of truth and danger. "Can you tell me what it means?" Mrs. Lestrange's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Truth and danger, eh? That sounds like Eleanor. She was always chasing things she shouldn't. Secrets, promises, people who didn't deserve her trust." She handed the locket back, her movements abrupt. "That vase! It was hers, wasn't it? Cursed glass, I called it. She said it held the key to everything, but all it brought was pain." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes gentle but probing. "What kind of pain, Mrs. Lestrange? What happened to Eleanor?" The older woman's gaze drifted to the fire, her voice dropping to a near murmur. "She trusted the wrong people, made enemies in her own family, in the village. That vase, she said it was proof of something, a debt unpaid. But she wouldn't tell me more, not even when I begged her to leave it alone. Then she was gone, and the vase with her. I thought it was lost forever." She paused, her eyes flicking to Miss Marple with sudden intensity. "You do well to leave it alone, too. Some debts are better left buried. The glass cuts deeper than you know." Miss Marple nodded, sensing the weight of fear behind the warning. "Thank you, Mrs. Lestrange. You've been most helpful." One last thing. Do you know who might have wanted to keep that vase hidden? Or who might be watching my cottage now?" Mrs. Lestrange's face closed like a door. "Watching, you say? Then you're already in deeper than you should be. I don't know names, but I know this. The past doesn't stay buried when you start digging. Be careful, Miss Marple. Eleanor wasn't." As Miss Marple stepped back into the woods, the air felt colder, the shadows longer. Mrs. Lestrange's words echoed. In her mind, cursed glass, debts unpaid, and the locket in her pocket seemed to pulse with secrets. Someone was watching, stealing shards, guarding a truth that had cost Eleanor Danvers her life. Miss Marple's steps quickened, her resolve hardening. The past was stirring, and she would meet it head-on. Chapter 6. A stain of crimson the morning. Mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a veil, softening the edges of the village's cottages and muffling the distant bleat of sheep. Miss Jane Marple stood in her garden, her pruning shears idle in her hand, her attention fixed on a patch of earth near the rose bushes. The previous night's unease lingered. The memory of the stolen vase shard, the figure in the churchyard, and Mrs. Lestrange's cryptic warnings about cursed glass and debts unpaid. But it was a discovery in the dew-damp soil that sharpened her focus now. A glint of green and indigo, half buried beneath a tangle of roots. She knelt, her knees protesting faintly, and brushed away the dirt. It was another shard of the shattered vase, its spiral symbol unmistakable. But what caught her breath was the stain along its edge, a dark, rusty red that looked disturbingly like blood. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The shard was not one she had missed when gathering the pieces. After the tea party, it had been placed here, hidden, but not well enough. Carefully, she wrapped the shard in her handkerchief and carried it inside, locking the door behind her. The cottage was quiet, the wooden box of Vase fragments still secure in its drawer. She placed the new shard on the kitchen table, its crimson stain stark against the white cloth. "What story are you telling?" she murmured, her mind already tracing possibilities. An accident? A deliberate clue? Or something far darker? Miss Marple knew better than to jump to conclusions, but the stain demanded investigation. She slipped the shard into a small tin and set out for the village. Her destination, the surgery of Dr. Haydock. The young doctor, with his modern equipment and sharp mind, could confirm whether the stain was what she suspected. As she walked, her eyes scanned the lanes for any sign of the mysterious figure she had glimpsed before. But the village was drowsy, its secrets hidden in plain sight. Dr. Haydock's surgery was a small, tidy building beside the chemist's shop, its waiting room empty save for a farmer with a bandaged hand. The doctor greeted her with his usual warmth, though his smile faltered when he saw the seriousness in her expression. "Miss Marple, not feeling under the weather, I hope?" "Not at all, doctor," she said, producing the tin. "I've found something curious in my garden. A piece of that vase from the other evening. There's a stain on it I'd like you to examine. It looks troubling." He raised an eyebrow, but took the tin, leading her to a small laboratory at the back. Under the bright light of a microscope, he scraped a sample of the stain and prepared a slide. Miss Marple watched, her hands folded, as he peered through the lens. After a moment, he sat back, his expression grave. "It's blood, all right," he said. "Human, from what I can tell, though the sample's old. Decades, perhaps. Hard to say more without proper forensic equipment, but it's not fresh." "Where did you say you found this?" "In my garden," near the roses," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm but her mind racing. "It wasn't there before. Someone placed it, I'm sure." De Haydock frowned, rubbing his chin. "That's unsettling. You think it's tied to that locket business? Or the Danvers family?" "I think," she said carefully, "that the vase is more than an heirloom. It's a witness to something that happened long ago, something someone wants to keep hidden." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Miss Marple, I don't like to stir up old tales, but after that tea party I remembered something my father told me. He was the village doctor before me, back when Eleanor Danvers disappeared. There was talk of a fight at the manor, a bad one. No one was ever charged, but he saw bruises on Eleanor's arm once, a week before she vanished. He never forgot it." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. "Bruises, you say? Did he know who might have caused them?" Dr. Haydock shook his head. He suspected someone close to her, family, perhaps, but it was all hushed up. The Danvers were powerful then, and people didn't ask questions. She thanked him and left, the shard safely back in its tin. The bloodstain was a chilling confirmation that the Vase's secrets were not merely scandalous, but potentially deadly. As she walked home, her thoughts turned to Eleanor Danvers. Her disappearance, the locket, the note. Had the vase been a witness to violence? And why was its shard, stained with blood, left in her garden now? By the time she reached her cottage, the mist had lifted, but a new tension hung in the air. Miss Marple paused at her gate, her gaze sweeping the garden. The rose bushes were still, the gravel path undisturbed, but she felt it, a sense of being watched as if the past itself were holding its breath. She tightened her grip on the tin. The vase's pieces were cutting deeper, and she was determined to uncover the wound they hid. Chapter 7. The Weight of Envy. The village hall of St. Mary Mead was abuzz with the hum of voices, the clink of teacups, and the rustle of agendas as the parish council gathered for its monthly meeting. Miss Jane Marple sat near the back, her knitting in her lap, her eyes quietly observing the villagers who filled the room. The blood-stained shard of the vase, now locked in her cottage drawer alongside the locket, weighed on her mind. Dr. Haydock's revelation about Eleanor Danvers' bruises and Mrs. Lestrange's warnings about debts unpaid had deepened the mystery, pointing to a web of motives rooted in the past. Tonight, she hoped to catch a glimpse of those motives in the present. The meeting began with mundane matters: repairs to the church roof, plans for the harvest festival. But Miss Marple's attention was on the older families of the village, those whose roots tangled with the Danvers history. The Prices, the Wrens, the Blackwells, names that had echoed through St. Mary Mead for generations, each with their own grudges and glories. She had heard whispers of rivalries tied to the Danvers manor, and the vase, with its cryptic symbols and bloody shard, seemed to be stirring those old wounds. As the council debated a proposal to restore the manor's overgrown gardens, tempers flared. Mr. Blackwell, a stout farmer whose grandfather had worked for the Danvers, slammed his fist on the table. "Why waste money on that cursed place?" he barked. "The Danvers left nothing but trouble. My family lost everything when they sold the manor. Land, livelihood, all because of their greed." Mrs. Price, her lace collar quivering, shot back. "Greed, you say? Your grandfather was no saint, Tom Blackwell. Everyone knew he envied the Danvers' wealth. Tried to swindle them out of that fancy vase, didn't he? The one with all those queer markings." The room fell silent, heads turning. Miss Marple's needles paused, her heart quickening. The vase, mentioned so casually, yet with a spark of recognition that sent ripples through the crowd. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but clear. "A vase, Mrs. Price. Do you mean the one from my attic? The one that broke at my tea party?" Mrs. Price flushed, realizing she'd said more than intended. "Oh, well, I just heard stories, Miss Marple. My aunt said the Danvers treasured it, said it was worth a fortune. But it caused nothing but strife. People fought over it, family, servants, even neighbours." Mr. Blackwell's face darkened. "Fought? That's putting it kindly. My grandfather swore the Danvers cheated him out of his share. He helped them buy that vase, used his connections in London. But when he asked for payment, they turned him out. Said he was lying. He never forgot it. Miss Wren, Clara's father, and a quiet man with a weathered face, spoke up, his voice low. It wasn't just money. That vase, it changed people. My mother worked at the manor, saw it all. She said Eleanor Danvers was obsessed with it. It held some secret. After she disappeared, the family fell apart. So did ours." The air grew thick with unspoken accusations. Miss Marple's eyes moved from face to face, noting the clenched hands, the averted gazes. Envy, she thought, was a powerful force. Powerful enough to fester across generations, to drive someone to steal a shard or leave a bloody clue in her garden. The vase had been a prize, a symbol of wealth and power, but also a catalyst for betrayal. As the meeting adjourned, the villagers dispersed into the cool evening. Their voices hushed. Miss Marple lingered, approaching Mr. Blackwell as he gathered. His coat. "Your grandfather's story is fascinating," she said, her tone conversational. "Did he ever mention what made that vase so special? Beyond its value, I mean." He hesitated, his eyes wary. "Only that it wasn't just glass. He said it was marked, like it meant something. But he never got close enough to know more. Why, do you ask, Miss Marple? You've got that look about you." She smiled faintly. "Just an old woman's curiosity, Mr. Blackwell. Good evening." As she walked home, the village lights twinkling in the dusk, Miss Marple's mind churned. The vase had been a lightning rod for envy. Between families, within them, Eleanor Danvers' obsession, the Blackwells' resentment, the Wrens' quiet pain, they were all threads in the same tapestry. And someone, she suspected, was still carrying that envy, watching her, stealing pieces of the past to keep it buried. Me, she paused at her gate, her gaze sweeping the garden. The rose bushes were still, but the air felt charged, as if the weight of old grudges lingered. The vase's secrets were unravelling, and with them, the motives of those who had never forgiven its cuts. Chapter 8. The Mirror of Truth. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the clouds, casting a muted glow over Miss Jane Marple's cottage. Inside, the air was still, broken only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Miss Marple sat at her writing desk, the locket and the blood-stained shard of the vase before her, their secrets as elusive as ever. The village meeting had revealed the depth of envy surrounding the Danvers family and their prized vase, but it was Mrs. Lestrange's words, "Cursed glass," and the strange symbols etched into the shards that tugged at her intuition. There was something more to the vase, something beyond greed or scandal. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint creak from the floorboards above. The cottage was old, prone to settling, but this sound was deliberate, like a footstep testing. The wood. Miss Marple's hand paused over the locket, her senses sharpening. She rose, her movements quiet, and climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, where she had found the vase. The air was thick with dust, the shadows deep, but her eyes caught a glint near the far wall. A small, tarnished mirror, half hidden, behind a stack of crates. She hadn't noticed it before, though she'd searched the attic thoroughly. The mirror was oval, its frame carved with faint echoes of the vase's symbols, spirals, half-moons, a jagged lightning bolt. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. She lifted it carefully, its weight surprising, and carried it downstairs to the sitting room, where the light was better. The mirror's surface was clouded with age, but when she polished it with her sleeve, it gleamed with an unsettling clarity. Holding the mirror up, she examined the blood-stained shard, tilting it to catch the reflection. The spiral symbol seemed to shimmer, and for a fleeting moment the mirror showed not just the shard, but something else. A flicker of movement, like a shadow passing through a darkened room. Miss Marple's breath caught. She adjusted the angle and the image sharpened. A struggle. Two figures grappling, one raising a hand as if to strike. The scene vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only her own reflection staring back. She lowered the mirror, her mind racing. Was it a trick of the light or something more? Miss Marple was not given to fancy, but she knew the power of objects to hold memories, to carry the weight of their history. The vase, the locket, the mirror, they were connected not just by the Danvers family, but by something deeper, perhaps even uncanny. The symbols were the key, a language she had yet to decipher. Determined to test her theory, she retrieved another shard from the locked drawer, this one bearing the half-moon symbol. She held it to the mirror, and again a vision flickered. A woman, Eleanor Danvers perhaps, clutching the vase, her face twisted in fear as a door slammed shut. The image was brief, fragmented, but it sent a chill through Miss Marple. The mirror was no ordinary heirloom. It was a window to the past, revealing truths the vase had witnessed. She sat back, her knitting untouched, and considered her next move. The visions, if they could be trusted, suggested violence. A struggle, a confrontation, that had left blood on the vase and perhaps led to Eleanor's disappearance. But who had been involved? And why was the mirror hidden, only to be found? Now, when the vase's secrets were resurfacing, her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. She slipped the mirror under a cushion and answered, finding Miss Clara Wren, the schoolteacher, standing on the threshold. Clara's face was pale, her hands twisting nervously. "Miss Marple, I needed to speak with you about the vase. I heard what was said at the meeting, and I think I know something." Miss Marple ushered her inside, noting the young woman's agitation. "Sit down, my dear," she said gently. "What is it you know?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the box of shards on the table. "My father mentioned my grandmother working at the Danvers Manor. She saw something the night Eleanor disappeared. A fight in the study. She never told anyone, but she said the vase was there, and it wasn't just a fight over money. It was personal." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Personal how, Clara?" "She wouldn't say," Clara whispered, "but she was afraid of the vase, of what it meant. She told me never to speak of it, but now, with you finding it, I'm afraid too." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind already fitting this new piece into the puzzle. The mirror's visions, Clara's story, the blood-stained shard, they all pointed to a moment of betrayal, preserved in glass and silver. As Clara left, promising to search her grandmother's old letters, Miss Marple returned to the mirror, its surface dark and waiting. The truth was close, but it was sharp, and she knew it would cut deeper still. Chapter 9. A Thief in the Night. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its silver light filtering through the curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage. The mirror, now hidden beneath a cloth in her sitting room, seemed to hum with secrets, its fleeting visions of violence and fear lingering in her mind. The blood-stained shard, Clara Wren's hesitant confession, and the growing sense of being watched had sharpened Miss Marple's resolve. The vase's mystery was no longer just a puzzle. It was a danger, and someone was desperate to keep its truths buried. She had taken precautions after the first shard was stolen. The wooden box of vase fragments was locked in a drawer, the locket tucked in a concealed pocket of her knitting bag, and the mirror safely out of sight. But Miss Marple knew that caution alone wasn't enough. If the thief struck again, she would be ready. Before retiring for the evening, she had rigged a simple trap, a thread tied across the sitting-room doorway, thin enough to go unnoticed, but strong enough to snap if crossed. A dusting of talcum powder on the floor near the drawer would reveal footprints. Old tricks, perhaps, but effective. Sleep eluded her, her mind turning over the mirror's images. Eleanor Danvers, the struggle, the vase as a silent witness. At midnight, a faint noise broke her thoughts, a soft scrape, like a window being eased open. Miss Marple sat up, her heart steady, and listened. Footsteps, muffled but deliberate, moved through the sitting-room below. The thief had returned. She slipped on her dressing gown, her movements silent, and crept to the top of the stairs. The thread across the doorway was broken, and in the moonlight she saw a shadow moving near the drawer. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark clothing, their face obscured. They worked quickly, picking the lock with practiced ease. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. This was no amateur. She descended the stairs, her steps light, and flicked on the lamp. The figure froze, the drawer half open, a shard of the vase glinting in their gloved hand. "Good evening," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm. "I believe that belongs to me." The thief spun, their eyes wide behind a scarf that covered the lower half of their face. For a moment she thought they might bolt, but the narrow doorway and her steady gaze held them in place. "Put it down," she said, "and we'll have a little chat." To her surprise, the figure complied, placing the shard on the table. Their voice, when it came, was muffled but young, trembling with desperation. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I needed it." Miss Marple stepped closer, noting the talcum powder on the thief's boots. "Needed it for what? And who are you?" The figure hesitated, then pulled down the scarf, revealing a familiar face. Tom Price, the butcher's apprentice, barely 20, with a shock of red hair and a look of cornered fear. "I'm sorry, Miss Marple," he stammered. "I didn't mean to scare you. It's just my gran, she's sick, and we can't pay the doctor. I heard the vase was valuable, that even a piece could fetch a fortune. I thought I could sell it." Miss Marple's expression softened, but her eyes remained sharp. "Tom, you've been watching my cottage, haven't you? And you took another shard before. Tell me the truth, why this shard, and who told you about the vase?" Tom's shoulders slumped. "It wasn't just talk. Mr. Blackwell, he's been saying for years that the Danvers vase was worth more than gold, that it had secrets. He got drunk at the pub last week, said the symbols meant something, like a map to hidden money. I didn't believe him at first, but then you found the vase, and I got desperate, Mr. Blackwell," Miss Marple repeated, her mind filing away the name. "Did he tell you to steal it?" No, he just talked. I thought if I could get a piece, I could sell it to someone in London, someone who'd know its value. I'm sorry, Miss Marple. I'll give it back, I swear. She studied, him weighing his fear against his story. Tom was no mastermind, but his desperation made him a pawn in a larger game. Very well, Tom, she said. Leave the shard and go home. We'll say no more about this for now, but if I hear you've been near my cottage again, I'll have a word with the constable. Tom nodded, his relief palpable, and slipped out the window he'd entered. Miss Marple locked it behind him, her thoughts churning. Tom's theft was impulsive, driven by need. But Mr. Blackwell's loose talk about the vase's secrets and symbols was no coincidence. The farmer's family had envied the Danvers for generations, and now, it seemed, that envy was stirring trouble anew. She returned the shard to the drawer, checking the talcum powder for other footprints. There were none, but the broken thread and Tom's confession confirmed her suspicions. The vase's pieces were drawing out the greedy, the desperate, and perhaps the guilty. As she settled back into bed, the mirror's visions flickered in. Her mind, a struggle, a woman's fear, a truth waiting to be uncovered. The thief in the night had been caught, but the real danger, she knew, was still lurking in the shadows. Chapter 10. The Echo of a Scream. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp bite, the first hint of autumn brushing the village's hedgerows with gold. Miss Jane Marple sat at her kitchen table, a pot of tea steaming beside her, the locket and the blood-stained shard of the vase before her. Tom Price's midnight theft and his mention of Mr. Blackwell's drunken tales had added new threads to the tapestry of the mystery. The mirror's visions, Eleanor Danvers, a struggle, a moment of violence, hovered in her mind, urging her to dig deeper into the night Eleanor had vanished. Today, she intended to follow a lead that had surfaced in her thoughts. The manor, house where the vase had last been whole. Miss Marple had learned from village gossip that the manor, now abandoned and overgrown, had been the heart of the Danvers world. It was there, 40 years ago, that Eleanor Danvers had disappeared, leaving behind whispers of a fight and a scream that some swore they'd heard on the wind. She dressed warmly, tucking the locket into her pocket, and set out for the manor, her steps purposeful despite the uneven path that led to its rusted gates. The manor loomed at the edge of the village, its once grand facade choked with ivy, its windows dark and shattered. The gardens were a wilderness of thorns and tangled roses, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught signs of recent disturbance. Broken branches, a trampled patch of grass. Someone had been here, and not long ago. She pushed open the gate, its hinges groaning, and made her way to the front door, which hung ajar. Inside, the air was heavy with damp and decay, the grand hall echoing with the ghosts of its past. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the boarded windows. Miss Marple moved carefully, her footsteps muffled on the rotting floorboards, her senses alert. She was searching for the study, the room Clara Wren's grandmother had mentioned, where a fight had taken place the night Eleanor vanished. The study was at the back of the house, its door half off its hinges. The room was a ruin. Bookshelves toppled, papers scattered, a fireplace choked with ash. But in the corner, beneath a fallen curtain, she found something that made her pause, a faint scratch on the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged. Kneeling, she brushed away the dust and uncovered a trapdoor, its edges worn but intact. Her heart quickened. A hidden space, perhaps where the vase had been kept, or where secrets had been buried. Before she could investigate further, a voice broke the silence, quavering but clear. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Marple." She turned to see Mrs. Price, her lace collar askew, standing in the doorway. The older woman's face was pale, her hands clutching a shawl as if to ward off the cold or the past. "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, rising smoothly, "I might say the same of you. What brings you to this old place?" Mrs. Price hesitated, her eyes darting to the trapdoor. "I saw you heading this way and thought you might need help. The manor's not safe, you know. And after all that talk about the vase, I worried you were stirring up trouble." Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but piercing. "Trouble or truth? You mentioned the vase at the meeting, and now here you are. Tell me, Mrs. Price, what do you know about the night Eleanor Danvers disappeared?" The older woman's lips trembled, and she sank onto a dusty chair. "I was young then, just a girl, but I remember. My brother worked at the manor tending the horses. He came home one night, white as a sheet, said he'd heard a scream from the study. Not a cry for help, a scream of rage, he said. He never went back after that. The next day, Eleanor was gone, and the village hushed it up." Miss Marple nodded, her mind fitting this into the puzzle. "Did your brother see anything? Anyone leaving the manor?" Mrs. Price shook her head. "He wouldn't say. He was scared, Miss Marple. Scared of the Danvers, scared of what he'd heard. But he mentioned the vase once, said it was in the study that night, glowing like it had a life of its own." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The vase, the scream, the trapdoor. They were converging on a single moment. She glanced at the trapdoor, then back at Mrs. Price. "Thank you, my dear. You've been very helpful. Shall we leave this place? It's no place for lingering." As they walked back to the village, Mrs. Price's nervous chatter filled the silence, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere. The scream had been real, and the vase had been there, a witness to rage and perhaps worse. The trapdoor beckoned, a promise of answers or danger. She resolved to return, but not alone. The echo of that scream was growing louder, and she was determined to hear its full story. Chapter 11. The Final Shard. The twilight cast a soft violet hue over St. Mary Mead, the village settling into the quiet of evening. Miss Jane Marple sat in her armchair, the locket open in her hand, Eleanor Danvers' photograph gazing back with eyes that seemed to hold both fear and defiance. The blood-stained shard, the mirror's visions, and the echo of a scream from the manor's study had brought her closer to the truth. But one piece of the vase remained missing. The final shard, stolen or hidden. Its absence a gap in the puzzle. She suspected it held the last clue to Eleanor's fate, and she was determined to find it. The trapdoor in the manor's study had lingered in her thoughts, a hidden space that might have concealed the vase or its secrets. But her visit with Mrs. Price had been interrupted, and she hadn't yet returned. Instead, a new lead had emerged that morning, courtesy of Clara Wren. The schoolteacher had arrived at the cottage, clutching a bundle of her grandmother's letters, her face pale with discovery. "Miss Marple," Clara had said, her voice trembling, "I found something in Gran's things. She wrote about a man, an outcast, they called him, who lived near the manor. She said he knew things about the Danvers, things no one else did. His name was Silas Gray. Silas Gray." The name stirred faint village memories. A recluse, shunned after a falling out with the Danvers, rumoured to have been a groundskeeper or handyman before retreating to a shack in the woods. Miss Marple had thanked Clara and resolved to seek him out. If anyone held the final shard or knew its significance, it might be this forgotten man. She set out as the light faded, her coat buttoned against the evening chill, the locket and a flashlight in her pocket. The path to Silas Gray's shack wound through the same woods where Mrs. Lestrange lived, but deeper, where the trees grew gnarled and the air felt heavy with secrets. The shack was little more than a lean-to, its roof sagging, its walls patched with tin. No light spilled from its single window, but a faint curl of smoke rose from a makeshift chimney. Miss Marple knocked, her knuckles firm against the splintered door. A long silence followed, then a rasp of movement. The door opened a crack, revealing a gaunt face, weathered by time and hardship. Silas Gray's eyes were sharp, darting over her with suspicion. His hair was a tangle of white, his hands gnarled, like the roots of the oaks outside. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice rough as gravel. "Ain't no one comes here." "I'm Jane Marple," she said, her tone calm but unwavering. "I'm looking into an old matter, Eleanor Danvers and a vase from the manor. I believe you might know something about it." Silas's eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he'd slam the door. Instead, he stepped back, gesturing her inside. The shack was dim, cluttered with broken tools and stacks of yellowed newspapers. A single chair sat by a smouldering fire, and on a rickety table lay something that made Miss Marple's breath catch. The missing shard of the vase, its lightning bolt symbol, glinting in the firelight. "You've got it," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "The last piece." Silas sank into the chair, his hands trembling. "Didn't steal it," he muttered. "Found it years ago, in the manor's garden. Night Eleanor disappeared. I was there, fixing a gate. Heard the scream, saw shadows in the study window. Went to look, but it was too late. Found this in the dirt, near the roses. Kept it, thought it might mean something." Miss Marple sat across from him, her gaze steady. "What did it mean, Mr. Gray? Why keep it all these years?" He clutched the shard, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It was a pact, Eleanor. She made a deal with someone, family, I reckon. The vase was part of it, proof of what they'd done. She told me once, when I was fixing her fence, that the symbols were a code, a promise. But someone betrayed her. That night I saw 2 figures leave the manor, one limping. Never saw Eleanor again." "A pact," Miss Marple repeated, her mind racing. "Do you know who betrayed her?" Silas shook his head, his eyes haunted. "Didn't see their faces, but they were close to her. Had to be. The vase, it's cursed, ain't it? Brought nothing but misery. I kept this piece to remind me, to never trust promises." She leaned forward, her voice gentle. "May I have it, Mr. Gray? I believe it will help me find the truth." He hesitated, then pushed the shard across the table. "Take it, but be careful, miss. The truth don't always set things right." Miss Marple slipped the shard into her pocket, its weight a final piece of the puzzle. As she left the shack, the woods seemed to close in, the wind carrying a faint echo of that long-ago scream. Silas Gray's story confirmed the mirror's visions. A betrayal, a pact, a moment of violence sealed in glass. The final shard was hers, and with it she was ready to confront the past, and those who still guarded its secrets. Chapter 12. The Pieces Come Together. The sitting room of Miss Jane Marple's cottage glowed with the soft light of candles, their flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. The wooden box of Vase shards sat open on the table. The final piece, the lightning bolt shard from Silas Gray, now joined with the others. The locket, its photograph of Eleanor Danvers staring solemnly, rested beside the blood-stained shard, and the tarnished mirror, each object a silent witness to a 40-year-old tragedy. Tonight, Miss Marple had invited key figures from St. Mary Mead to her cottage, determined to weave the threads of the mystery into a coherent tapestry and reveal the truth behind the shattered vase. Her guests arrived promptly, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Mrs. Price, her lace collar fluttering with nervous energy. Mr. Blackwell, his jaws set as if bracing for a storm. Miss Clara Wren, her eyes wide with apprehension. And Dr. Haydock, his youthful confidence tempered by the gravity of the occasion. They sat in a semicircle, the air thick with anticipation, as Miss Marple stood before them, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp as needles. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady. "You've all played a part in helping me understand a mystery that has haunted our village for decades. The disappearance of Eleanor Danvers and the secrets of this vase." She gestured to the table, where the shards gleamed like broken promises. "Tonight, I believe we can put the pieces together." She lifted the locket, opening it to reveal Eleanor's photograph. This was found among the vase's shards, hidden for years. Eleanor was no ordinary woman. She was bold, perhaps too bold, and she made a pact. A promise sealed in this vase, its symbols a code known only to those involved. But promises, as we know, are often broken. Mrs. Price shifted uncomfortably. A pact? What sort of pact, Miss Marple? Miss Marple's gaze moved to Mr. Blackwell. A pact born of greed and envy. The Danvers family was wealthy, their manor a symbol of power. But that wealth came at a cost. Mr. Blackwell, your grandfather believed he was cheated out of a share of the vase's value, didn't he? He helped acquire it, only to be cast aside. Mr. Blackwell's face reddened. That's old history. My family was wronged, but we didn't do anything to Eleanor. Perhaps not directly, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. But envy festers. Clara, your grandmother saw a fight in the manor's study that night, a personal betrayal, and Silas Gray, a forgotten man, heard a scream and found a shard in the garden, proof of a struggle. She lifted the blood-stained shard, its crimson edge catching the light. This was left in my garden, a clue or a warning. Dr. Haydock confirmed. The blood is old, likely from the night Eleanor vanished. The mirror, she uncovered it, its surface gleaming, showed me visions. A struggle, Eleanor's fear, a betrayal by someone close. Dr. Haydock leaned forward, his voice low. "You're saying someone killed her?" Miss Marple nodded. "I believe so. The vase was the key to a secret. A hidden fortune, perhaps, or a debt owed. Eleanor trusted the wrong person. The symbols were a map, a promise of wealth, but someone wanted it all. They fought in the study, and Eleanor was struck, the vase, breaking in the chaos. The blood on this shard is hers." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "But who? Who would do that?" Miss Marple's eyes settled on Mrs. Price, who had grown pale. "Mrs. Price, your brother heard the scream, saw shadows leaving the manor. He was young, terrified, but he knew more than he told. Your family, too, had ties to the Danvers. Your father worked their land, resented their wealth. I believe he was there that night, part of the pact. When Eleanor refused to share the secret, he acted in rage." Mrs. Price shook her head, tears welling. "No, no, my father wouldn't. He was angry, yes, but he loved Eleanor. They were close once. He said she broke his heart, not the other way around." Miss Marple's voice softened. "Love can turn to hate, my dear. Your father struck her, perhaps not meaning to kill, but the blow was fatal. He hid her body, perhaps in the manor's trapdoor, and fled with the others involved. The vase was shattered, its pieces scattered to bury the truth." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling like dust. Mrs. Price sobbed quietly. Mr. Blackwell stared at the floor, and Clara gripped Dr. Haydock's hand. Miss Marple closed the locket, her expression sombre. The vase's secrets cut deep, as Eleanor's note warned. Greed, envy, love, they tore lives apart. We may never find her body, but we know her story now. As her guests left, their faces heavy with the truth, Miss Marple stood by the table, the vase's shards glinting in the candlelight. The puzzle was solved, but its resolution brought no joy. The past had been laid bare, and St. Mary Mead would never quite be the same. Chapter 13. Beyond the Glass. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a tentative light, the sky streaked with clouds that seemed to mourn the secrets laid bare. Miss Jane Marple stood in her garden, a small trowel in hand, the wooden box of vase shards at her feet. The locket, the blood-stained shard, and the mirror were safely locked away in her cottage. But the vase's fragments, those jagged pieces of indigo and emerald that had unravelled a 40-year-old tragedy, could not remain. She had decided to bury them, to let the earth reclaim what had caused so much pain. The confrontation in her sitting room the previous night had left the village shaken. Mrs. Price's tearful admission of her father's likely guilt, Mr. Blackwell's sullen silence, and Clara Wren's quiet grief had confirmed Miss Marple's reconstruction of Eleanor Danvers' fate. A pact born of greed, a betrayal fueled by love and rage, and a death hidden in the shadows of the manor. The trapdoor in the study, she suspected, held Eleanor's remains, though she had left that discovery to the authorities, who were now investigating with sombre efficiency. As she dug a small hole beneath the rose bushes, Miss Marple reflected on the human frailties the vase had exposed. Envy, as Mr. Blackwell's family had harboured, desperation, as Tom Price had shown, fear, as Mrs. Lestrange and Silas Gray had carried. Even love, twisted into violence by Mrs. Price's father, had played its part. The vase, with its cryptic symbols and cursed legacy, had been a mirror to those weaknesses, reflecting truths that cut deeper than glass. She placed the shards in the hole, their colours muted by the soil, and covered them carefully. "Rest now," she murmured, though whether to the vase or to Eleanor, she wasn't sure. The act felt final, a closing of a chapter that had haunted St. Mary Mead for too long. She stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, and gazed at the village, waking around her, the chimneys smoking, the church bell tolling faintly. Life would go on, as it always did, but the scars of the past would linger. As she returned to her cottage, a strange sensation stopped her at the gate. The air seemed to shimmer just for a moment, and a faint sound, like the echo of a sigh, carried on the breeze. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her hand tightening on the trowel. She glanced at the rose bushes where the soil was undisturbed, but the feeling persisted, a whisper of something unfinished. Inside, she checked the mirror, half expecting another vision, but its surface showed only her reflection, calm and resolute. The locket, too, was silent, its photograph of Eleanor now a memorial rather than a clue. Yet the unease remained, a prickle at the back of her mind. The vase was gone, its secrets buried, but its influence, the way it had stirred greed, fear, and memory, felt like a shadow that might never fully fade. Miss Marple sat in her armchair, her knitting untouched, and looked out at the garden. The roses swayed in the morning breeze, their petals bright against the earth. She thought of Eleanor Danvers, a woman who had dared to chase a dangerous truth, and of the village that had closed ranks around her loss. "Some things," she said softly, "are beyond the glass." The clock ticked on. The village stirred, and Miss Marple picked up her needles, her hand steady, but her mind alert. The mystery was solved, the vase interred, but St. Mary Mead, like all quiet places, held other secrets, and she would be ready, as always, to meet them with a clear eye and a heart unafraid of the truths they might reveal.